This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library
enough. You can get the Truefire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing. So just jump and do that if you're looking for the best price you can get Truefire All Access for. I saw an article come up with an interview with Joe Bonamassa, I think in Guitarist magazine, and I thought it was an interesting kind of thing because he was talking about something which I'm really interested in, as I kind of had this in mind from like John Mayer and Keith Urban with Beato. They were talking about and saying like for you to really know a guitar really well, like it makes sense to have like a number one. And you know, they were talking about watching a guy playing the guitar, and it was like you could tell he really knows that guitar. It's not that they know how to play guitar, it's that there's also like a bond with that specific instrument. Yngwie Malmsteen was someone who was like actively trying to avoid that, so like he doesn't want to be so attached to one guitar that he feels like it has to be that one or he can't play it. And Joe Bonamassa, similarly, obviously a guy with like a big collection of vintage guitars, who sounds amazing like on all of them. And I kind of thought it was an interesting perspective, like what he'd said around it, which was that basically
pause in your brain and just go, I just need to pretend that this is the only guitar I own. It works.
Even if it's not, that's the route to confidence playing with one type of guitar. So let's get into it a little bit more. And then he also goes on to talk about something else which I think is even more interesting. I don't know how many of you guys have like more than 1, 2 or 3 guitars. If you want to, we could hold a survey in the comments. If you've got 2 or 3, or, you know, just, you know, let folks know I've got a problem or I'm sensible. Anyway, so one of the things, like for me specifically, pick up something like this guitar, the Silver Sky. I feel at home on this because I've played a Strat an awful lot. To me, it's kind of been the guitar that I would go to most of all, maybe 10 years or something like that, that my go-to instrument has been a Strat, I think. I think that makes sense. Maybe a little bit longer. Before that, would there have been S-type guitars? Potentially, that's a Fly. Probably, you know, growing up I would play an RG. But like a Strat, definitely. So the Silver Sky feels pretty comfortable to me. Now, there are a couple of things that go a few different ways. Like, what if your guitar has a different radius on a Strat type guitar? What if the nut width is, you know, a bit different? Because that's a thing that varies. And then another thing that varies quite a bit is kind of like the trem action. And so you might have a guitar that you might have to bend up a bit higher. So what he's saying, just imagine when you're playing it, that this is the only guitar you own. And this is actually, it reminds me of when I was in the studio in Eastbourne with Ollie, who did that Marillion Marathon side project of Mark Kelly's. He asked me to go down, and we kind of, I took a few guitars. I took my blue Strat, I took the white K-line Strat that I had at the time, and I had also the Les Paul. And I picked up a Les Paul very briefly for a moment, and we kind of both quickly decided just go back to the blue one. And I think that's a mixture of things where it's like confidence, maybe tonal choices, but also your comfort on the instrument. But also kind of that was like confirming the fact that we both knew there was this other guitar that I'd been playing more, and it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy part where it's like, well, actually that one kind of works best. And I think that's probably a thing that happens on a lot of sort of session type gigs, right, where you take several things, options, so that it at least feels like you've got the option. And maybe that's part of what happens with guitars as well, that it helps us to bond with our number one, the fact that we at least have these other things to compare it to and go, actually when I pick that up I feel less at home than this. But anyway, that was kind of Bonamassa's first point, which was like, you need to just pretend like it's the only guitar you've got. That might mean putting some of the other guitars away. It might mean just closing your eyes and imagining you're an actual Les Paul player or whatever like that. Now, the other key thing, which I thought was maybe even more interesting, was that he said...
But I also have spent 10,000 hours with a Telecaster, 10,000 hours with a Strat, 10,000 hours with a Les Paul, and 10,000 hours with a 335.
I don't know that I've put in 10,000 hours on one type of guitar. Maybe the Strat might be, but definitely a Les Paul I've definitely not put in, because I've only had one for maybe 2-3 years, and the amount of hours that I put into a Les Paul, nothing like enough. So I thought, actually, this is kind of an interesting one, because when I was about 14, I'd practice for 2 hours a day. Now, 2 hours a day, I think, is pretty way above what I get to do now that LED's around, but just there's like a measure of like, do you even practice every day is like a question for you if you're watching this. Touring musicians, do you get to practice every day? Do you get to play for 2 hours every day? And what would it take to get 10,000 hours on just one of your instrument? How many years would that take? If you do the math on it, it's like just under 14 years. Now, I've not got any guitar here that I've had for 14 years, let alone several types of guitar that I've put in that amount of hours on. So I guess 10,000 hours is just a number that you throw out there that's kind of like a round number, and it's kind of got this idea that you become an expert at the thing. But I do also think that there is maybe some wisdom there in that you can't necessarily expect to feel comfortable playing a Les Paul if, you know, you've put in meaningful amounts of practice on a Strat that you've never done on a Les Paul, you know. So I think that was a really interesting one for me. And whether Joe Bonamassa probably has played a lot more guitar than we get to. If I'm now, what am I, 36, started playing when I was 8, so that's 28 years of practice. So 28, if I did 2 hours every single day, there was definitely years when I would have done more than this, but there's also definitely years when I've done less than this. If you kind of put 2 hours a day as like the goal over a 28-year span, that still only gets me to sort of like 20,000 hours, right? And so really mastering a bunch of different types of kind of guitar, you know, in terms of feeling like a master of the instrument, if it, you know, really does take 10,000 hours, which probably, I think a lot of this stuff is transferable, right? Like, it doesn't feel so different playing a Tele to a Strat that it might not actually take 10,000 hours. But I think it does make sense that playing a guitar that's a totally different style, if you've put in, you know, 10,000 hours on one type, that we should expect that it would take a while to adjust to that. So in your head, whilst you're making that adjustment, you can definitely help this along by kind of, instead of thinking about like this is not a Strat whilst you're playing a Les Paul or whatever, just think, well, Les Paul, this right now is all I've got to play, and stop thinking about it being uncomfortable. Do like a little bit of work in your head mentally around that. But also just remember, like, how many hours have you actually put into a Les Paul? Like, if I've had one for 2 years, do I play one for an hour a week? Probably not. If it was an hour a week, it'd be like 100 hours. I don't think I've played a Les Paul for an hour a week at all. So it should be no real surprise that it doesn't actually feel that comfortable to me to play a Les Paul. It sounds super obvious because it's obvious, but it's also one of those things that I've not really heard anyone talk about before, like 10,000 hours on a Strat, 10,000 hours on a Tele, 10,000 hours on an ES335, and you think, maybe there is something to this. So Joe Bonamassa saying sensible things again. What do you think? How many hours have you put in on different types? And do you feel yourself like identifying with the guitar that you've played the most hours on? Are you someone who can code switch quite well? I'd love to know your thoughts. Actually, when I'm gigging, I tend to feel more comfortable at the moment on a Tele or a Les Paul. I'm going to try gigging my number one Strat tonight, see what happens with it, but it is strange to me. Maybe it's because like the stuff that I play on a gig is so different to what I actually play at home that it doesn't particularly matter exactly what guitar I'm playing, because I'm not generally like getting a chance to sort of improvise totally freely for like minutes at a time like I do at home. Like, a gig is so much different to this. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Cheers for stopping by. Hope you're having a good weekend. It's too hot by far. Cheers.